Welcome to Season 2 of the Pivot Point podcast. This season, we are featuring candid conversations. We're interviewing industry experts and leaders about candid conversations they've had that involve gender in some way. They're going to fill us in on what happened, what prevented them from addressing it, the risks they took in that conversation, why they chose to say something, and how they handled it, and what happened next. Stay tuned for Pivotal Stories, a Positive Change. In our studio, we have with us a dynamic duo in athletics and leadership. We have Erin Hiltner and John Kietzmann, who are both Associate Director of Athletics at Metropolitan State University of Denver. Both have varied experience. So Erin has been in D2 at various colleges throughout her career, and John has been in D1, D2, and NAIA throughout his career. They've worked together for several years, and we actually had the opportunity to meet at a recent conference, their Rocky Mountain Symposium, where they bring together leaders in athletics to share best practices and learn from one another. And so casually over beers, we learned a lot about each other and the dynamic relationship they've had over time, and I just couldn't help but bring them onto the podcast so that we could learn, get a window into the athletics industry and what the gender challenges are there, and more importantly, have a candid conversation. So welcome, Erin and John.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So kicking us off, as we do with all our guests, is a candid conversation. I understand you both have prepared one that you'd like to share with our listeners. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, one of the things that got us talking when we very first came together and started working as a team, we were assigned to go on a trip maybe 2 months into Erin's tenure at the university here at MSU Denver. And we went together and got to know each other a little bit on the road and got to know about each other. But over time, one of the things that came up and that I've really respected about Erin is that she's been very open to addressing things with me directly. And, talking about some candid conversations, one of the things that set things up for the relationship that would become with Erin and myself is early on, I made a comment to Erin about her dress and her appearance. And I said, hey, that's a nice skirt. You don't wear skirts very much. And her immediate reaction to me was, this is exactly why, John. And, that really kind of set up a conversation that we had about not having attention drawn to her for how she looks or what she wears, and, her intent on how she dresses and stuff that I had never, ever thought about. So that was kind of our intro to each other, and building off of that, our relationship and how we interact has really been a lot of John's ignorance and Erin's expertise on getting to know her challenges and what she faces, and especially in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Erin, what was your take on that situation?
So it was great because it opened a few doors, but it also is just an example of being in an industry that's very male dominated. And so as a lot of industries are, but athletics is for sure. And the NCAA has numbers to support that. But it's just having those recognitions and appreciations of a working environment together. And it did probably kick off John. It's more painted in John's mind than mine, because obviously it made a bigger impact. And I probably said a little bit sarcastic, but just to kind of show him my side of how I operate and how I think through things a little differently than he does.
Well, and the candid conversation is hard, especially from a female perspective. If you're in a male-dominated workplace, John, didn't have any negative intention by giving you a compliment about your appearance, but we know that women are far more likely to get a comment about their appearance than men are. And I think just playing it back to him is, this is why I don't wear skirts. You kind of did it, playfully, but it sounds like message delivered that he understood, like, oh, I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that for her and I that we've discovered, or that I've discovered, is there's a lot of things that she encounters that I've never thought about, not from an intentional or some type of way to approach things. But even things as little as, we go into a staff meeting and people look at Erin to start taking notes for the staff. And, she's an administrative professional, no different than myself. And there's no reason why I can't take the notes or somebody else around the table can't. But, just some of those basic things that, or at least for me, I didn't think about initially, that now I actually approach a lot different because of stuff that she's brought up to me.
Yeah. Yeah, the note-taking thing is a big one that affects women much more so than men. And there's lots of examples of that, like office housework, bringing treats to a meeting, meeting logistics, that kind of stuff that outside of our regular day job work does tend to fall on women, or we just assume somehow that women are meant to do that. Erin, other examples of things like that may have happened?
I think luckily, none of our office is really big into coffee drinking, so I've never been asked to go get the coffee, which is great. And that
happens.
Yeah, it's similar lines to what you're saying with the housework and other things too.
We have another guest that talks about her coffee incident. It was exactly what you were describing.
Yeah. And so I think it's more also the dynamics in the room too that we've talked about several times, that I, either because I'm quiet by nature or just the dynamic of what we have around the table, that I'll start conversations and get interrupted, or when I start to speak, I'll say it, and then 5 minutes later, somebody else says it. It's a great idea then. So sometimes just that typical, I've heard it in other situations and other women, but it does happen, or it has happened to me more frequently in the beginning when I first started than of late. But, and that's where I think,
earn your stripes a little bit.
Yeah. And that's where it's been great. And that's part of going back to my point to John too, about the skirt. And, I want to be recognized more for what I bring to the table than what I'm wearing at the table.
Ooh, I love that. That is such a great quote. I see that on our podcast banner. I want to be recognized for what I say at the table, not what I'm wearing at the table. That's excellent. And Erin, what you're hinting on too, the interruptions and the taking credit for your own ideas. That's a term I think we talked about before, but bro-appropriating, where men have a tendency to do that, not just with women, but also with men. But we quiet women's voices when we do that, right? Because you're learning like, okay, well, I'm not going to be heard, or someone else is just going to take my idea later. Might as well not share it. And so you kind of learn, some women will just be more quiet as a result of that. So you kind of have to stick in there and earn your stripes a little bit so that you show that you have the ability to perform, and then you're respected. Whereas men, tendency is we see the potential before the performance has to be, explained or verified. So one thing that I really love about the duo here is that you've worked together for a number of years, right? 4 years, if I remember correctly. Yep. And you said it was kind of a rocky road over the years. Other than the skirt comment, there's been some other things. Very different personality types, which also speaks to a lot of diversity other than just gender. There's several different factors of diversity. But walk us through your working relationship. How has it evolved? What's worked well? But from a gender dynamics, what would you recommend to our female and male listeners that are struggling to get along with the opposite sex at work?
It's not easy. There's no right answer. I think for us, because we have been fortunate enough to attend some conferences and travel together and be in situations where we have personal growth and professional growth going on at the same time, that it's been great. One conference that we attended together was NACTA, right? And so it's more of a power suit, big time. There's a lot of big names in athletics there. And we made a deal that I would go to a few sessions that John goes to, and then we switched and he went to some sessions that I went to. And so both of us were pretty miserable actually attending the other person's session, but it was great to see where that excitement originates and where each of us are coming from when we talk about different topics and sessions, and why our areas are suited for us and not for each other, and why we don't cross boundaries.
That's so good to share each other's passions and learn more about what you are both drawn to.
Yep. So I think that kicked off a lot of good conversations too.
And for Erin, she'll undersell herself because she is quiet and stuff. And for me, that's the that's the part where I'm not. So, our personality styles vary pretty drastically, but Erin is great at planning and logistics, and she can set things up. She's great at setting up the dominoes, and then I like to consider myself decent at coming in and just knocking them down. So, those types of pieces, and us understanding kind of what each other's strengths are, and really the backbone behind our relationship, personally, professionally, is the trust piece. And some of our struggles, and I think she would admit this or agree with me, has been on understanding the intent that each of us are trying to do. So where I might be, asking questions like, "Hey, what's going on? How are things?" And asking those questions to her, and she's more of a private person who might be like, "You're getting in my space. I don't necessarily want to answer those things, or if I do, it's not right now or in this setting."
Right.
Where then my reaction is, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" I swing to this other end, me. Right? Right. And I want to swoop in and help, and that's some of that is the learning piece of trying to figure out not just gender but personality and where she's coming from, and really kind of getting to know her as a person versus trying to solve everything for her.
Right. That's brilliant, right? You don't have to go into rescue mode to be an ally, right? You sometimes just need to allow her the time to process, or like you said, kind of just give her some space, because it's not usually about you. She doesn't respond the way you want her to.
Oh, sometimes it is, Julie. Let's not pretend. Sometimes it is.
But usually I do tell him. We've got that relationship where I feel like I can be pretty direct and tell him if it is him.
Well, I remember, I think at that point we met, there was an eye contact situation where you gave him a look.
Yeah.
And so there was this nonverbal cue of, yep, that's what I'm talking about. So do you have signals, like if you're in a meeting and something happens, like do you give him the stare, Erin, or is there a code word that you have?
We're usually pretty good about that.
Yeah, but there are definitely times where I'll look at her and like, "Hey, it's okay. Like, speak up. I'll support you on this." Yeah. Or there's some pieces on that where it's okay to take the lead, or and there's times where we've disagreed too, and we've gone head to head. But part of it is, like I said, it's understanding where each of us is coming from and what the end game is. I think that's a huge piece. There was one time where we were working on an athletic event where I was working, doing my thing, problem solving, trying to fly around and get things done. And I was in that rescue mode for sure. And Erin was pissed.
Not
So, and I didn't even realize it until later, right? Like, I mean, that, I blew right through that thinking, "Hey, I'm helping." But, it's something we talked about later. And it's just those types of pieces where if we're able to kind of have those conversations, and they are uncomfortable and they are hard sometimes, but knowing that each of us cares about the other and well-being and successful and professionally and personally, I think that's a huge chunk of it.
Yep. Well, and the trust factor, circling back to that, it's much more easy to have a conversation that's difficult and involves conflict when you have trust. And so once you've built that trust and gotten to know each other, gotten to know your strengths, like you said, the areas you're passionate about, where you're aligned and where you're probably not aligned, you've got that foundation of trust that you can step in to these conversations where you're not going to agree. Because of course you're not going to agree with everything. That's a falsehood of lack of conflict. Every relationship has some degree of healthy conflict. So yeah, that's great. Great evolution. And, I'm just thinking too about being in the athletics environment. Certainly when I was there speaking at the symposium, I noticed there were quite a few males in the audience and in the speaker set. What do you think? I find in speaking to a variety of industries across the country that, everyone thinks their industry is so different with this gender problem. And I get some industries really do. Like you said, the NCAA has some stats that back this up, that we really don't have equality and diversity quite yet, despite the best efforts. Technology is the other one that people often point to. So I'm curious, what do you think is the real problem in athletics with promoting, gender diversity and equality? And what do you think it's gonna take to get us on a more equal playing field?
So, one of the numbers that comes out there is understanding. Erin has a specific designation here at the institution of SWA, or Senior Woman Administrator, that you referenced, and that's a role that it guarantees that there's a female perspective when there's major decisions to be made as a part of the institution. Now, with the designation, it's how it's implemented school by school, and that's the problem that we're seeing, kind of on a national scope, where the SWA, or the Senior Woman Administrator, thinks that they know what their role is and thinks they understand how that role is supposed to work. And then their direct supervisor believes that they know how that role is supposed to work as well, but they are not seeing it in the same vein. So, that's a major communication issue, or however you want to phrase it. There's a major breakdown there, and an opportunity that's lost. So, in general, that's kind of where I see some of the pieces coming together. Is that you look at it and you say, on the outside, here's the intent of this designation. It's to make sure that the female voice is represented at major decisions or in the department. It's not to be in charge of women's athletics. It's not to be as part of a Title IX thing or anything along those lines. It's really designed to make sure that perspective is represented. And you start looking at some of these things, and when less than half, when senior women administrators believe that less than half of their direct supervisors understand their role, there's a communication gap.
Wow. I would agree. So the SWA designation, that is interesting, with decision making, especially to make sure that there is a diverse person, a diverse perspective, that a woman's voice is being heard at the table. That's interesting. So, Erin, what does that look like for you? I mean, do you get tapped on to come to meetings, or how does that operationalize?
So it's been different. I've had the designation at 3 different entities, so at 2 schools and at a conference level, and it is being involved in a lot more meetings. In general, whether that's at a conference level or an NCAA level, there is more access and opportunities, which has been great, especially for me personally, getting to serve on some different committees and other things, but sometimes that's more work without getting any other flexibility.
Right.
But at the same time, it is nice to have that, although I kind of joke, like, well, I've been the only woman, so I don't know what that means in terms of having somebody else at the table that has a title, as well, to see if there's any differences. So at least from what I've experienced, it's still, they're smaller staffs, they're smaller in general, especially at the Division II level. So I'm sure it might look a little different at a larger institution, or maybe a Division I school.
Okay. That is a really interesting concept, and so you're usually the only woman when you get drawn into those meetings, and so that's also interesting, because a lot of times when we're the only, we kind of have to cover and to kind of show different sides of ourselves, and so sometimes women, when they're the only woman in the room, can become a little bit more masculine to kind of blend in with the group. Does it ever feel like that, or do you feel like how do you feel like your perspective is being heard?
Yeah, it's so funny, because that's another conversation John and I have had too, and kind of goes back to the appearance and different things too, where it's like, well, you try not to stand out to be too different, because then that takes away the focus of the rest.
Right.
But trying to think of how to answer. I mean, it kind of goes back to before, to answer the bigger part of your question too, with past, present, and future. So the reason why we're at where we are is more based off of the restructuring of men's and women's athletics combining into the NCAA. And then at present, I think just the level of interest for women in sports is just not the same. I mean, even today at lunch, the guys were talking about statistics in sports and college football from the 90s. And, quite honestly, I don't really have much interest or knowledge and background in that. So I kind of just listen and, catch on to things once in a while. And then as far as moving forward and maybe how to change it, it probably needs to be more rooted in younger girls and having the conversation, because I didn't even realize that I could have a career in athletics, that it just wasn't something that crossed my mind, or I didn't really realize that it would be available. So I think a combination of the interest and then also the educational piece, and showing girls and young women that they can do this and that there are positions available if that's something they want to pursue.
Yeah. Yeah. They got to see it to believe it. Yeah. It's interesting. Get exposure to young girls. So women like yourself, right? Showing them that career path is possible. It is interesting because the interest level, like you said, no matter what we've done, aside from, I mean, you can think of a few anomalies like the women's soccer team. And, every once in a while we'll get a burst in women's athletic interest, but there still is primarily focus on male athletics. So it becomes kind of difficult to think about how women can see themselves in those careers. So certainly an excellent point, but it sounds like the NCAA is definitely doing, I know they're really, really focused on diversity and inclusion. And having designations like this to make sure that the diverse perspectives are being heard at the table, not just seen but heard. So, excellent. Well, in kind of closing, John and Erin, I'm curious how if our listeners want to connect with you or follow some of the work that's going on at the university or the NCAA, what's the best way to follow or see what you got going on?
So that's my area. That's the fun area. It's all the external stuff that we have going on. So our website, where we post all of our stories of how things are happening and tracking our wins and losses, is roadrunnersathletics.com. And on there, you can definitely find and connect up with both Erin and myself. Our bios and phone numbers are posted. So easily accessible in that area for sure.
John's big on Twitter. Erin, not so much.
Yeah, there have been one or two posts that we've thrown out there about Twitterless Erin. So it's we'll get there eventually.
What's your Twitter account, John?
JDKMANN.
All right. We'll put that in the show notes too, along with the website. So thanks, John, Erin. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you and reconnect with you. What a fascinating dynamic you have, and what great changes you're putting into an incredible industry. So very proud to know you and share your story. Thank you for listening to the Pivot Point podcast and our candid conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend or subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us at Next Pivot Point on social media, and check out our website for free, amazing resources to support your candid conversation journey. It's www.nextpivotpoint.com. Thank you.